Hey y'all, welcome back. Episode 5 on the journey with your boy JP. Today, to be honest, I don't know how long I'm going to get out here because I can hear thunder in the background and it looks like it's going to storm, but I thought that was kind of a perfect lead in to talking about mindfulness and the idea of weathering storms. And there's this beautiful analogy in mindfulness of clouds in the sky. And one of the images that I found so helpful recently and for myself right now and for my clients is this image of viewing our big emotions, not just emotions, but also difficult life circumstances, as a storm passing through us. What happens so often is that we identify as the storm. Sadness shows up in our life, anger, hurt, or just difficult circumstances, whatever they might be. And it feels all encompassing. It's like it totally takes us over. And this is what we call identification, or being blended with the parts, or fusion with the feelings. And even in our language, we talk like this. We say, I am angry, I am sad. And it's an unfortunate thing because that language is actually very, very unhelpful. What would be much better to say, of course, we don't talk about this in the daily life, right? We don't talk like this, is I'm aware of sad feelings within me. Because you're not your thoughts. You're not your feelings. You're the space in which all of this experience emerges. And so the analogy of the sky and the clouds is a wonderful analogy for the mind. There's an aspect of the mind that's like the clouds passing by. And this part of the analogy is the thoughts, the feelings, right? Some feelings are big fluffy ones that we really like, that we want to hold on to, which can also be a problem. Some of the clouds are the big storm cloud variety, the ones that might be blowing in here pretty soon. But where we get caught up in issues is we try to either push the clouds away or we try to grab onto them. And this all is what causes suffering. It's our desire for the clouds to be different. What the practice of mindfulness teaches us is that thoughts, just like clouds, come up out of nowhere. And if you allow them to, they'll pass away all on their own. What mindfulness teaches is as you see over and over these thoughts are just like clouds, there's also another quality of the mind, and that's the big blue sky, the space of expansive awareness, the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's the space of consciousness in which all things that we experience exist. It's not the content of your experiences. It's not the thoughts, the images, the feelings, the situations. It's the very context. And in mindfulness, what we learn to do is rest as the context rather than identifying with the content. And I've come to believe that this tendency for us humans to identify as our thoughts. See, a big storm comes up and then we become the storm. We take the storm on and we lose all of our perspective. What we can learn to do is realize, okay, this is a storm passing through me. It's passing through me. And just like when there's a storm, if I look outside my window, I see the rain falling down. It doesn't look like the storm's passing. But I know if I look on a radar, I can see that storm passing. I know that if I look out over a big plain, I can see the storm passing. When we're in the storm, it doesn't feel like it's going to pass. And that's why we need to practice. When we're not in the storms, we need to practice resting as the big blue sky. And so there's a series of different meditation practices that help us cultivate that awareness. But in my own experience of mindfulness meditation and I have a pretty serious practice. I practice pretty much, 5 days a week for about 20, 30 minutes. I've been doing that probably for the last, since like 2019, it's 2025. Wow, that's a long time. That's great. Yeah, probably 6 years. Um, and so this is a practice. It's something that we cultivate. And this is actually, I think, a misperception of mindfulness. People think they should practice mindfulness to calm down. That's not true. If you try to use mindfulness, it's going to backfire because mindfulness is about non-judgment, non-reactivity. So as soon as you say, is this working for me or not, you're judging it and it's just not going to work. But rather, mindfulness isn't about clearing the mind of thought. It's not about stopping them. It's about realizing, it's about ceasing the identification with thought. It's realizing I am not my thoughts. I am not my feelings. It's gaining perspective. It's recognizing that I am the space. I am the being in which these thoughts and feelings show up. But I'm the being. The thoughts and feelings aren't the being. I'm the being. And these are all storms that pass through me. And so what I've come to believe in my own practice is that identification is one of the greatest causes of our suffering. I think there's two that I've come to see. And the first I learned pretty early on as in my training as a therapist, and I was told by a teacher, and I think he's right, that avoidance is pretty much the cause of all the psychological suffering. I think that's kind of true. But then the other part of that is identification. We tell ourselves stories. We have stories about our lives. And these are just stories. They're not necessarily true. One of the things that mindfulness has really helped me to do has been to step back and ask, what story am I telling about myself? What story am I telling here in this situation? I've found that myself, my personality, I tell a lot of stories of I'm getting taken advantage of, I'm not appreciated. There's also a tendency, right? All these devaluing stories. I'm not good enough. I'm not appreciated. There's also stories of idealization. I'm better than everybody else. I'm going to be the best, right? There's these polarizations. I mean, that's one of the other things. And this is a beautiful kind of image, a beautiful metaphor in the internal family systems languages. When I'm talking to my clients, one of the things I express is we often have what's called polarizations. And these are internal conflicts. And what it's like is that there's one part of us that's like, I don't believe that I'm any good. And what happens is it's kind of like that part of me leans over the side of a very small boat, and the boat starts to rock. And so what happens, there's another part of me that gets really, really scared and jumps to the other side and says what? I'm better than anybody else. So I have this devaluation of myself, an idealization of myself. And it's kind of like, I think what happens is we often live in a kind of Mexican standoff with ourselves, where all these parts of us are pointing at each other and nobody's willing to lower their guns. And this is where the goal in internal family systems theory is to develop a self-leadership. To say, hey, okay, we have to integrate, we have to understand this system, that there's a counterbalancing system of opposites here. One of the beauties I love about this is that in the Aristotelian tradition, and later, Aquinas developed this further and promulgated it further, is that virtue is the middle ground between two opposite vices, one of too much and one of too little. And so that's what's happening here, right? One part of me thinks too little of myself, devaluing. Another part of me thinks too much of myself, idealizing. The virtue is in the middle, and this is what humility is. It's to know yourself. It's not to think badly of yourself. It's to know yourself as you are. But what we need to do then is stop identifying with both sides. Because this is what happens when you identify. Some days I just feel like I'm the worst thing ever. And then other days, I feel like I'm the best person ever. What we need to do is realize, okay, this is a story. This I'm the best person ever. That's a story. Okay, I'm the worst person ever. That's a story. We step back and realize I'm not that part. I'm not that story. I'm the big blue sky. And then in internal family systems theory, from that place of open awareness, now in IFS, in internal family systems theory, they call that the self with a capital S. The self is the spacious awareness that is calm, compassionate, connected, curious, courageous. I think there's two others, but I can't think of them. And so the self is the natural leader. And a great analogy for this is like in The Lord of the Rings, right? Aragorn is the natural leader. But because of pain and difficulty, he's been, displaced ultimately. So the self oftentimes gets covered because we get hurt, and so other protective parts step in. Now we live as these kind of protective parts, these protective mechanisms, and then we think that's us, but it's not. And so what's interesting about IFS is IFS says that the capital S self, what IFS describes as this capital S self, mindfulness describes as non-self, the space of open awareness. But we're talking about the same thing here. And this is one of the beautiful things. This is one of the fun things about therapy. You learn about different theories, different practices. More or less, we're all talking about the same thing. And we're all trying to find more freedom. There's a kind of general recognition that we try to find identity in ourselves, and we develop false identities. And the cool thing is that this is just ubiquitous through various spiritual traditions as well. And so as we're on the kind of tail end here talking about identity, I really think that identity is a farce. I think trying to find our identity is something that's helpful early in life, but something that we have to actually let go of later in life. And that's the spiritual quest. And this is what Carl Jung said. Carl Jung said that the most formative years of human development were actually the midlife crisis. It's one of the areas that he really differed from Freud, among others. And what Carl Jung said is that the midlife crisis happens, and it's the core developmental period because in the first halves of our lives, we're very exteriorly focused. He called this extroversion. This isn't about socialization. It's just about, are you focused on the outside of things, material, or the inside of things, spiritual? There's more nuance than that, but we'll just hold it there. Any Jungians out there, don't jump down my throat. And so what Jung said was that for the first half of our life, we were focused on the outside because you had to get an education, get a job, find a partner, find a house, take care of your kids, right? You have to figure out material safety. And so he said the first half of our life is all about the outside. It's all about seeking, striving, figuring out. But then he said what happens in midlife is usually there should be a transition. When you have the job, you have the family, you're established. And he says the challenge there is that there's not all this stuff on the exterior to explore. And so what Jung says is the challenge of the midlife crisis is to turn inward. It's a spiritual quest. It's a quest to actually transcend the material reality. Because that focus on the outside, that was all about your survival. Once you're established, you have to shift from survival to thrival. And this is one of the other interesting things that I think, as a therapist, it's been really interesting to explore these kind of different layers and experiences of development. I've worked with kids, I've worked with teens, I've worked with adolescents, I've worked with young adults, I've worked with mid-adults, I've worked with old adults. And one of the things that I think I've come to find is Maslow's hierarchy of needs says, we have different levels of needs. We have basic survival needs, we have kind of connection needs, and then we have kind of self-transcendent, self-actualization needs. And you can't move on from one to the next need until the first base need is met. This makes sense, right? You can't look at philosophizing until you have food. It's pretty basic, pretty intuitive, pretty nice system. I think unfortunately what happens a lot of times is parents in their childhood experience something like, okay, we didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough food, we didn't have X, Y, or Z, right? And so as children, they didn't have those basic needs. And so they weren't able to step above them. And so I think oftentimes what happens is those parents work very, very hard to provide the next step for their family. So it's like, okay, food and shelter. But then what happens is because they're able to give that next level to their children, unless they have risen above that as well, they're like, well, you have it so much better than I did. And that's true. But there's a hierarchy of needs. And the answer is actually something like, hey, mom and dad, it's because you provided a better life for me that you had that I actually am calling you on to more. Like, hey, mom and dad, you were able to give us a lot more financial stability than you had in your childhood. And what that gave me is that, like, okay, now I'm looking at belonging needs. And this is a higher level of need, but it's like, this is actually what you want, mom and dad. Mom and dad, you want me to be in a place where what I'm asking of you is something more than you know how to give. And I think that's the task for us parents, is realizing the places for ourselves and in our own life where what we're being asked of by our children is something more than we're capable of give because it wasn't given to us. And then we need to do the work there. That's what I'm trying to do. One of the things that I'm being asked to give that I'm not quite sure how to is, right, attention, time, space from work, stability. I had pretty good stability. Trying to learn how to give my family a present, emotionally attuned dad that can hear their needs and respond to them. So I don't know. I think there can be this feeling of like, oh, I can't give you any more. We're always called on to more. Shame says I'm not enough, but this isn't about shame. It's not about you're not enough. It's about there's more for you, and that's a big difference. Shame says you're not enough. But the love of God that draws us out of ourselves, the self-actualizing tendency in man, the tendency of us to pursue goodness says, I'm made for more. And so that's what that's actually what I want to be thinking about today. That it's not about you're not enough. It's about you're made for more. Shame says you're not enough. And so any growth, it's about you being bad. But love says you're made for more. It's not that you're not enough and that there's something wrong with you. It's that there's more for you here than you have. Growth that way is an experience of love rather than self-abasement. So, yeah, we'll continue on the journey. Thanks for joining. Take care.